Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really critical issue. The conditions China has laid out for potentially restarting trade negotiations with the United States. It's absolutely central in the current economic climate, with the friction between these two giants being, well, pretty intense.
Definitely palpable, yes.
To break this down, we'll be drawing on various press reports, including insights highlighted by Bloomberg.
Good sources.
So let's get straight into it. We're going to explore China's expectations and, what they really mean.
Absolutely. And these conditions, they're not trivial. They paint a very clear picture from Beijing's perspective about how they see the relationship with Washington.
And they really highlight the depth of the disagreements on trade, don't they?
They certainly do.
Okay, so first condition up, and it seems absolutely fundamental for Beijing, is mutual respect. What does that actually mean in practice, according to them?
Well, this idea of mutual respect, as China frames it, goes way beyond just diplomatic niceties. Beijing is demanding an end to criticisms they see as dismissive or provocative, particularly aimed at Donald Trump and his administration.
Right, the rhetoric.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a call for a public commitment to respect China's sovereignty, its institutions, and its political choices.
So it's not just about being polite.
Not at all. From Beijing's viewpoint, these critiques aren't just about specific policies. They feel they challenge the legitimacy of their governance model.
Oh.
It's something deeply tied to their whole narrative of national rejuvenation. It's about recognizing their right to self-determination, their way.
So that's seen as the absolute foundation. Without that, talks can't even begin.
That's the message. It's the bedrock of trust needed before any real negotiation can happen. In their eyes, anything less is seen as, well, not serious.
Right, so we're talking about something much more fundamental than just protocol. It touches on recognizing the legitimacy of the Chinese political system itself.
Precisely. And you have to remember the context. These heightened trade tensions. China interprets these criticisms as attempts to destabilize them, to question their development path.
So to negotiate constructively, they need a strong signal from the U.S. indicating a fundamental shift in posture.
That seems to be the requirement, yes. A change in tone and substance.
Okay, the second condition China's emphasizing is consistency in U.S. policy. This relates to those sudden shifts, the frequent U-turns in Washington's foreign policy.
Yes, exactly. Those abrupt reversals are a constant source of, anxiety for many international players, and China is no exception.
I can imagine.
They complain these unpredictable shifts, these volte-faces, make any kind of long-term strategic planning extremely difficult.
You can't plan if the rules keep changing.
Right. Beijing wants a more predictable U.S. diplomatic approach, one based on, durable commitments, not just impulsive reactions to the latest news cycle.
Like trying to build a trade partnership with someone who changes the terms every week.
That's a good analogy. It makes long-term investment and planning almost impossible. That's kind of how China views the constant shifts in U.S. policy lately.
So essentially, China's looking for a partner whose word carries weight and whose decisions aren't just driven by momentary impulses.
That's precisely it. This American unpredictability is seen as a major hurdle to building a stable, trust-based trade relationship.
Okay, another key demand from Beijing. Lifting unilateral economic sanctions. What's their specific stance here?
China sees these sanctions as, frankly, unacceptable pressure tactics, a form of intimidation. For Beijing, these measures fuel instability and are fundamentally incompatible with a partnership based on equality.
So they see them as unfair.
Unfair, potentially illegal under international law, and crucially, deeply damaging to any prospect of rebuilding trust between the two nations.
Right.
Maintaining these sanctions while claiming to want negotiations would just be seen by China as, a lack of sincerity from the U.S.
So it's clear that for China, lifting these sanctions is an essential prerequisite for negotiating on an equal footing.
Absolutely. Non-negotiable, it seems.
Let's move on to Taiwan. Always an extremely sensitive subject. What are China's specific demands on this point?
Regarding Taiwan, China's position is consistently clear and absolute. They consider the island an integral part of their territory.
Okay.
Any foreign interference is seen as a violation of their sovereignty and constitutes a non-negotiable red line.
So what are they asking Washington to do or stop doing?
They're calling on Washington to strictly respect the One China principle, as laid out in bilateral agreements.
Which basically means,
which at its core is Beijing's stance that there's only one sovereign state called China, and Taiwan is an inalienable part of that China.
got it.
In practical terms, this translates into demands for an immediate halt to U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, an end to official visits by U.S. officials to the island.
And any support, even indirect, for Taiwanese independence aspirations.
Exactly. Those U.S. actions are viewed by Beijing as significant provocations that seriously escalate regional tensions and undermine bilateral trust.
It's a point they definitely won't compromise on then.
Seems highly unlikely. They see these U.S. actions purely as fuel on the fire in the region.
Understood. Another notable point China raised: appointing a single, fully authorized negotiator from the White House. Why is this specific demand so important?
Well, this demand is really aimed at ensuring efficiency and stability in the talks.
Okay.
China has clearly been frustrated by, let's say, the multiplicity of voices within the U.S. administration, often sending contradictory messages.
Right, different people saying different things.
Precisely. So Beijing wants to deal with one undeniable authority figure, someone with solid international experience who has the full confidence of the U.S. president.
Makes sense.
The goal is to establish a reliable communication channel and ensure that any commitments made actually carry weight and will be followed up with concrete action.
So it's not just about technical details, but building a strategic dialogue with someone empowered to make decisions.
Exactly, and implement them. China insists this single point person should oversee the entire process, from preliminary discussions right through to the final signing by top leaders.
So the idea is to have that reliable channel ensure commitments stick.
That's the core of it, yes. Avoid the confusion.
Okay, finally, the last point we'll cover is the impact of aggressive statements targeting President Xi Jinping personally. How are those remarks perceived in Beijing?
Those harsh criticisms and personal insinuations, they've been received very poorly in Beijing. Extremely poorly.
As you'd expect.
They're interpreted as an attack on China's national dignity and a lack of respect for its leader.
But is it more than just offense?
Oh, yes. Beyond the offense, these statements are seen as symptomatic of a lack of coordination within the U.S. administration. Or worse, perhaps reflecting a drift towards long-term confrontation, rather than a genuine desire to negotiate in good faith.
So they worry it's not just a negotiating tactic, but signals a deeper, more confrontational strategy.
That's the fear, that these aren't just words, but an indication of a fundamentally more adversarial approach.
So a clear U.S. commitment to more responsible, respectful diplomatic communication is seen as essential for any resumption of talks.
Considered an indispensable condition, yes. Tone it down, basically.
Right. Now, to really grasp the context of these demands, it's crucial to look back at the trade war itself. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent actually commented on the tariffs recently.
Yes, he did. Bessent clearly stated that the current tariffs, while maybe useful as short-term leverage,
Right.
they aren't a sustainable long-term solution for the U.S. economy. He pointed out the negative impacts.
Like what specifically?
Higher import costs for American businesses, damage to their global competitiveness, rising inflation, and ultimately a hit to consumer purchasing power.
Yeah, those effects are well documented. We also remember Trump's decree back in April imposing reciprocal tariffs. What was the thinking there?
That decree was primarily aimed at reducing the U.S. trade deficit and adopting a more protectionist trade stance.
How did it work?
It set a base rate of 10% and added extra tariffs for countries with trade deficits deemed excessive. The stated goal was to punish what were seen as unfair trade practices and push for renegotiating deals more favorable to U.S. interests.
But it wasn't popular internationally.
No, widely criticized, seen as a break from free trade principles and causing major disruption to global supply chains.
And then there was that measure on April 9th, applying a 10% base tariff for 90 days to over 75 countries, but specifically excluding China.
Yes, that exclusion was very significant. The intent seemed to be to draw a clear line between trade partners considered cooperative and those seen as adversaries.
And China was firmly in the adversary category.
Unambiguously placed in that second category, yes.
Unfortunately, that strategy didn't prevent the trade war from escalating, did it? We saw massive tariff hikes from both sides.
No, it escalated significantly. The U.S. raised tariffs up to 145% on certain Chinese goods. High-tech, steel, electronics, industrial equipment.
And China retaliated?
Oh, yes. With duties up to 125% on American products hitting agriculture, automobiles, industrial goods particularly hard.
And the consequences?
Major disruption to global supply chains, significant stock market instability, and growing concern about the risk of a global economic slowdown. It's vital to understand these weren't just abstract numbers.
Right.
They targeted specific sectors, like Chinese high-tech and U.S. farming, creating direct pressure points and influencing the leverage each side felt it had at the negotiating table.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it seems really clear that the conditions China set for resuming trade talks are far from superficial.
Not at all.
They signal a desire to redefine the bilateral relationship based on mutual respect and equality, all against this backdrop of intense trade tensions.
Absolutely. The complexity of the situation is undeniable, and the stakes for the future of international relations are huge.
So the big question is,
Do these Chinese demands mark a decisive turning point? A sign of a new era of negotiation on equal terms? Or are they, perhaps, insurmountable obstacles to restarting the dialogue?
that is the fundamental question, isn't it? Something to really think about.
Indeed.
Thank you so much for shedding light on this complex situation.
My pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for joining us on this exploration. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the stories shaping our world.